and welcome to Camp, Scary and Squee, a podcast that tests my theory that every horror movie exists on a scale of divine camp to pure terror. Each week I'm joined by a guest who brings a horror movie for discussion, dissection and classification on the Camp Scary scale. And when my guest this week watches a horror movie, he's looking for a good soundtrack, smart protagonists and smarter antagonists, and something that subverts the sense of what's normal. Welcome to Daniel Clark. It's very exciting to have you with me.
Thank you so much. I'm so excited to be here to talk about something that is such a great passion.
As a bit of an icebreaker for today, I wanted to know what has been haunting you this week.
What has been haunting me this week? What hasn't been haunting me this week? The soon-to-be end of all of my streaming content. I've consumed just about everything Netflix, Stan, and YouTube has to offer. So I'm not. I'm definitely frightened of what will happen when I run out of that content. So we'll see.
It's becoming a proper hazard through lockdown. Is that we're like, oh, there's so much on Netflix, we're never going to run out, and now we're near the end. This 6 months of being stuck in the house.
Yeah, definitely. One of the things that me and some friends have been doing to sort of stave off the boredom is there's a new game. It's kind of a mix, and I think it's an homage almost to a mix between Sigourney Weaver and Alien. And John Carpenter's The Thing. It's called Among Us. It's a little mobile game where you play as a little spaceman on a ship and you do tasks and there's an imposter. It's kind of like a lot of sort of friend games.
I reckon I've seen this. And is this the one where you get asked questions and everyone gets the same question except for the person who's the alien?
No, though there is a version that I have played. I think it's on Switch, that version. Whereas this one, it's literally just the person who is the imposter goes around and tries to secretly murder the rest of the crew, and then the crew will get together whenever they discover a body, and they'll say, "Oh, I suspect Red is the imposter," and we'll say, "Well, I don't know. That sounds sus. I think Green was in engineering doing this, that, and the other." And it's done in this really cutesy sort of cartoon style. But it's on the topic of what's been haunting me. There's some gripping fan art of just gruesome disembowelments and killing blows that these cutesy little aliens have done to one another. That's the other thing I've seen that's been really front of mind. It just sort of shows the desire for fan art is strong out there.
Yeah, well, and also the desire to bring everything into horror.
Definitely.
People connect with it. I want to give you the honors. What are we going to be talking about today?
I am so excited to be talking about Train to Busan. A 2016 film, I want to say.
It is. So some quick stats on this. So it was released in 2016, written by Park Joo-suk, directed by Yeon San-ho, who has recently released Peninsula, which is the standalone sequel to Train to Busan, which I'm very excited about but haven't seen yet. And it's also starring a list of people who, if you are a fan of Korean cinema, you will have run into. So Gong Yoo, Ma Dong-seok, Jun Yoo-mi, Kim So-an, Kim Ui-sung, Choi Woo-shik, and An So-hee. All have been. I've seen them particularly in horror, and I feel like this is look. My exposure to Korean film is mostly horror, plus Old Boy, but Old Boy's kind of horror anyway.
I feel like Old Boy, I feel like there's a unique place for movies that can be described alternately as thriller or horror, and Old Boy fits neatly in that.
Yeah. So it's pretty cool to be talking about a Korean film. Some interesting facts about this. So it grossed $98.5 million on an $8.5 million budget, which is huge. Really, really good turnaround there.
Just bonkers, yeah.
Well, I think we're probably going to talk about how much we love this film, and that has a bit to do with it. And the IMDb description for this film is, while a zombie virus breaks out in South Korea, passengers struggle to survive on the train from Seoul to Busan. And a spoiler warning, we're about to talk about this film, so if you haven't seen it, I strongly recommend that you pause this podcast, go and find Train to Busan and watch it. It is very good.
It's incredible.
Before we launch into talking through the plot, I wanted to sort of. So before I spoke to you about this, I didn't actually know you loved horror. Like, we've been friends for a few years, and it just hadn't come up in our interactions. And one of the things that stood out when you were like, "Oh, I love horror," and you started just talking about all of these films that I love, and I said, we were talking about #Alive, this Korean zombie film, and you said you hadn't seen Train to Busan, and I was just for such a horror fan, and so what I want to ask is, this movie comes with a huge amount of hype because it is such a big blockbuster, and it really, like, people love this film.
Become a cult classic, apparently.
Yeah, but how did it match those expectations that came with it? Did you feel like it lived up to them?
Yeah, well, that is the thing, is that I'd heard so many people talk about Train to Busan, and it's one of those films where in my head I'd always thought, oh, I've got to watch that. And in fact, even when my partner and I were in Korea and we're talking about taking the train to Busan, I thought, oh, it's probably good that I haven't seen the film then. But there's always that worry that, you know, you're going to watch something that's been overhyped. But in my opinion, even the amount of hype that this film got, what didn't do it justice. It honestly was an absolute thrill ride. And it's as cheesy as that sounds, like, it was just, you know, I was literally, I feel like I've got a pretty strong will when watching a lot of the horror stuff, and we'll get into this, but it had me genuinely on the edge of my seat, where a lot of horror movies don't. I feel a lot of them are great fun, or particularly camp. But this one was an absolute. I sort of walked away from that thinking, okay, all right, what now?
Yeah, it does. It gives you that moment to pause and be like, how would I cope on a train?
Yeah, it definitely got the old zombie apocalypse plan running in the head. It's like, okay, so I'm living in an apartment. What would happen if zombies suddenly happened in Melbourne, where I am? How would I deal with that?
Yeah, I know the feeling. I look at our apartment and I go, oh, we're not in a good position.
Okay, so what have I got? Maybe a cricket bat? No, I got nothing.
I need a rope so I can abseil down the side of our building.
Yeah.
With no skills in doing that, so I'd probably just fall to my death.
It's actually funny, when my partner and I were in Korea, with the hotel that we were staying in, we walked in, and we were in a relatively nice hotel near Gangnam, and we found this thing that, speaking of abseiling down the building, we found this thing when we checked in, which was so peculiar to us. And we called down the front desk. We said, there's this thing behind the couch near the window in our hotel room. We're not sure what it is. They had to tell us, oh, it's an emergency rope in the event that we need to take the 40-odd floors down and all the stairs unavailable. So they've literally, in the hotel, got a rope for an emergency escape out of a 40th-story hotel window. And that was frightening at the start. And then you get used to it, but it was wild.
So you would just, on your own, hook yourself to this rope?
I guess so.
They're going to have a lot of dead people who don't know how to use, like me included.
I went back and I looked, and now that they'd told me what it was, I was kind of like, oh, okay, I can kind of see how this works. But it was the most surreal thing I'd ever seen in a hotel ever. And just talking about abseiling down the side of the building and Korean horror just sort of connected those two particular dots for me.
Well, look, one of the things that I love about horror is this idea that a lot of films kind of set a time bomb in the beginning. And this film, I think, does it quite well, in that as the audience, we see this opening scene. There's a truck going through a decontamination kind of checkpoint, and there's been some kind of leak in what they call the biotech district. And while reaching for his phone, this truck driver hits something. Turns out it's a deer, and he drives off. And we see this lovely or clever kind of moment where the deer stands back up after clearly a fatal hit, and we get a close-up on its face, and it's got these milky white eyes that kind of indicate something is not quite right, besides the deer kind of climbing up from its death. And for me, you see this a lot in zombie films, but you see it in lots of horror. And I was just interested to know whether this is something that really stood up for you, stood out for you? Did you feel like it gave you a good sense of where this movie wanted to go with that opening?
I feel almost blasphemous to say this, but in my head, when I started Train to Busan, I knew what I was getting into. And when that scene happened, I remember thinking, I wonder what it would have been like without that scene. Because I think that it would have been interesting to have this sense of tension building on a total sense of normalcy. Because then you sort of see in subsequent scenes, they present a very pedestrian sort of home life and all the rest of it. And I think it's interesting because it takes you from that weirdness back down again before they ratchet you back up. But I did find myself wondering, what if because I think the mechanism to get to the reason behind a zombie outbreak can be interesting. But I almost feel like it's interesting if you go into it in some depth. Whereas this was quite surface level, and I felt like it would have, yeah, like I said, it would have been interesting to see what would happen if it was just really you were in the lead character's eyes and didn't even know about any of that. And you actually saw this approaching menace because we, as the audience, we know that something's going to happen.
Well,
And
yeah, we're all going in here knowing what type of film we're seeing,
exactly, yeah.
and so it's not a surprise that zombies attack. There is like we do very much get taken back to a sense of normal when we see our lead character, and we actually, because we don't get many of the names of characters in this, like lots of the characters don't tell us their names. Seok Woo is one of them. He's our protagonist. He's the lead character. He's a fund manager, and I think this opening scene with him, once we've sort of established that there's a zombie threat, really kind of tells us a lot about him. He's eating at his desk while he's working. He's having what sounds like a frustrating conversation with his boss, and he's being overruled, and then he's overruling his subordinate. He asks Kim, his employee, what do kids like these days? And we realize that it's his daughter's birthday, and his wife and he have separated. His daughter's living with him, and his mum is looking after his daughter while he's at work. And I think, interestingly, we immediately get this very strong tension that he has with his daughter and with his wife. This kind of he's not a very present father. He's not his daughter really wants to see her mum, and he's been a barrier to that. And we assume because he's hurt as well, because she left, and so there's been this kind of reluctance to go. But it's his daughter's birthday. His wife is in Busan. We need that train to go to Busan.
Yeah.
And we get this kind of inciting incident to the film of like, this plot device is we need to get these people on a train. Let's get them on a train.
Of course. Yeah. It's so interesting sort of, seeing the daughter, as soon as she's saying, oh, please let me come with you. Like, please let me come with you to Busan. And he's sort of saying, no. And I was just waiting for that penny to drop. I was just waiting for the moment where, and I remember thinking, oh, what would happen if he doesn't take her? Like, I wonder what that would look like.
No, I think he took the day off work so that he could take her there to see her mum.
Oh, right. Yes.
It was a bit hard to sort of follow, I found, because it was sort of in my head the very first time I saw this. I was watching it going, oh, he's going to put her on the train, and then the film was going to be about him getting to that train because he put her on there, and then the zombies attacked.
Yeah.
That's what I thought the film would be.
Right.
And when he got on the train with her, I just went, okay, this is not what I expected, which is not a bad thing.
No, because and this actually sort of links in brilliantly to one of the things I thought of. The first thing I thought was I had expected it to take place on a train, if only because one of the most visceral thoughts I had while watching this movie was, wow, this would be a terrifying place to be during a zombie outbreak. Like, and I think it's filmed in such a way, and I thought this for most of the film, it's filmed in such a way where there are no wide shots, there's no big shot, or I shouldn't say there are none, but for a large part of it, it's quite close shots in quite close quarters, which when you're talking about zombies is not really, I mean, you could say it about many things, but it definitely, for me, contributed to that sense of menace, and that sense of sort of enclosedness.
Well, and because the shots are so, they're kind of narrow and deep because they're looking down train carriages, that sense of crowd and kind of clutter is sort of exacerbated because that perception, there could just be 10 people in that carriage, but because they're kind of filling all of the screen, it would feel fuller and more claustrophobic. If you were seeing this in the cinema, you'd just be like, fuck, there's so many people. How do I get out of here?
Yeah, yeah.
And so, yeah, it's like, it's such a, I like the premise of putting it on a train, but also because it gives you this kind of, by limiting part of the location, the story has to sort of work within it.
Yes, totally. Absolutely.
There are points that they get off the train and there's, opportunities to take the story beyond the train, but for the most part, it keeps coming back. And I mean, we can get into that. There are a lot of really great moments in this, but I think one of them, we have this train that they get on. There's a woman who runs and gets on the train just before the doors close, and the conductor closes the door, and we see that she's been injured.
And as soon as I saw that, I just remember thinking, oh,
here we go.
Here we go.
But Suan is looking out the train window as it pulls out, and the conductor is running, and then she sees him get taken by a zombie, and she doesn't quite know what it is, but it's such a great shot because the only person who saw it was the kid.
Yeah.
And so no one's going to believe her, but also she's not sure what she saw, so she just kind of lets it go.
Yeah. And
it allows us to feel the oncoming menace without all of the characters getting worked up. We as an audience know a little bit more. It's that setting of the time bomb. We see something's coming and no one else does.
And I find it such a great device. It's one of those things in my head where if I were a protagonist in a horror universe, I feel like if there was a kid saying something's wrong, I would want to believe the kid almost immediately because they have a preternaturally tuned sense of, and you're absolutely right. Like the scene stood out to me so much just for the way that it just, nobody else noticed. There was very little fanfare.
It was so brief. Like it was just the tiniest little moment of this conductor running and getting taken down by a zombie. And that's all you saw. They didn't labor it. They didn't give us too much. And I think that's such something you can really lose in zombie films, but also because often zombie films are slow shuffle zombies and not sprinty zombies. And this is the latter.
Although I do have thoughts on sprinting zombies versus slow shuffle zombies, and we can talk about that a little bit later. But I have strong thoughts on that.
I have strong feelings as well. And as quite a big fan of Romero, I think I have a particular point of view on zombies. But if it was a shuffle zombie, they would have had to give us more time with them to really recognize what was going on. Yeah. As a sprinting zombie, you get these flashes that are quick and kind of, just give us a hint of what's about to happen, and they don't overwhelm us.
And that's the thing is I think it's almost sort of a different strokes for different folks kind of situation when it comes to zombies. And I think in this movie, the sprinting zombies were perfect for exactly the reason that you've just said. So yeah, I think it worked really, really well and definitely gave me a chill right down to my bones.
Yeah. But we're on this train and one of the things we do is we get to meet a whole bunch of characters, and I think really cleverly they help us really connect to these people. And zombie films are always about the kind of scrappy group of survivors, and they're the people we kind of connect with, we identify with. The antagonist is never really the zombies, it's the people, it's someone in the group. And I think they do a really good job of building these things and kind of throwing in a few red herrings as well.
Yeah.
So just to quickly run through, we have and I'm not using their names because their names were not used in the film. They all have names. I found them when I was searching online. But I figure if they're not going to use them,
I think it's almost like they are just the deep, they're characters, but they're almost caricatures as well.
yeah, they absolutely are. They are sort of presented as these kind of archetypes for a genre. And so we
Yeah.
have this very tough guy husband.
Yep. I think I called him Swole Daddy every
Swole
time I
Daddy.
saw him on screen.
We're going to call him Swole Daddy. It's such a good name.
He's just been cast in Marvel's Eternals, I think.
Has he?
He has, yes. I think I saw on the Subtle Asian Traits Facebook group, they were talking that they were saying he got cast in Eternals. I'm not sure what role, but he's clearly, they must have seen him in Train to Busan. I don't know, but
I like him because he's tough and he's quite surly, except for when he's talking to his wife, who, she's very kind of demanding, and demanding's the wrong word. She knows what she wants.
Yeah. She's direct. She's straightforward.
Clearly adores her.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I think having the husband and wife, she's pregnant, is like this lovely kind of tension. Like he's trying to protect someone that he has this very strong connection to.
Yeah.
We have the baseball players, and particularly one baseball player and his girlfriend who, we focus on. We have the sisters.
I was a little confused about the way that they actually introduced because I remember watching it, and I was watching so intently, and she sits down and he seemed uninterested, and I remember being very confused about the dynamic.
Well, and then they all started saying, was it accept her?
Yeah, well, that was the English subtitle. So in my time sort of watching K-dramas and Korean movies, the subtitles are not always 100%, but I did struggle a bit with that. Yeah,
it was interesting. I was like, I couldn't quite piece together what the tension between them was.
Yeah.
We also have the sisters, who are these two older women, very close.
Love them.
I really love them, and we will get to.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh, I really enjoyed it. We have a homeless man, and I think probably the main antagonist we have is the chief operating officer of the train company traveling on his own train to get to Busan. So we form this group, and there are others who are involved in it, but for me, these were kind of the core players that we needed to know about.
They presented pretty quickly as well. I really love there's a part when they're introducing the COO, the homeless man, and then the protagonist's daughter, where the homeless man has clearly seen something, and he's hiding in the bathroom, and they did that thing where they did a fake out.
Yes, because you were expecting the woman that had been bit to be in the bathroom. To
be revealed, but they open the bathroom door and it turns out it's the homeless man, and so the COO and the daughter are both waiting for the bathroom. But the thing I found interesting, it's just one of these little moments, but I find that, it's so interesting when these little moments in movies can sort of touch you and leave you with these things, where he sort of turned to the girl and he goes, "Oh, if you don't study, that's going to be you when you grow up." And she turned to him and she goes, "Oh, well, my mum told me that, no, what is it? I've forgotten the exact wording.
She scolds him, and I can't remember what she says.
She says something like, "Oh, my mum told me if I don't, if I study too hard, I'll end up like you." Or she said something was basically like, how dare you like reduce a human life in that way?
Yeah.
And I just remember thinking like, how great. Well, great little lesson to throw in the film.
Well, also that little girl is just peak sass. Like, whenever someone is kind of acts in a way that's not really very kind or honorable or really is acting in a way that sort of goes against what we expect people to do, she just calls them out. She's like, fuck you.
It's brilliant. I love the sass from little girl, and I just remember watching her like retort to this older sort of COO and just being like, "Yeah, get it, girl."
And him just not really knowing how to take it because like he hasn't been talked back to in who knows how long.
Oh Lord, no, I love that. Yeah. So, but just a little moment when we're getting introduced to all the characters that taught me everything I needed to know about all four really of those characters. If we include the little girl's mum in Busan as well.
Yeah. They do a really good job of very quickly building a kind of a sense of these people and what's important to them and what their motivations are, which
Mm,
is really important as we move along.
yeah.
It does not take long before we have our first zombie attack. So
Mm,
we have these conductors on the train. Look, I've been to sort of Hong Kong and Japan and a few places in Asia, but I haven't been to South Korea, and I don't know whether or not trains have these. They're almost airline style conductors. They're so sharply dressed and quite authoritative.
so I've been to Seoul, and like I mentioned, my partner and I were going to take the train to Busan. We ended up not, which I regret. We did travel on a handful of Korean trains though, and I'm trying to remember. I went on the so we were in Osaka as well, and we did go on the Shinkansen. I know they've got those
Mm.
sharply dressed conductors, but I'm trying to remember. I can remember there being conductors, but I can't remember if their uniforms are that sharp. I'm thinking maybe the train in this movie is a particularly fancy one, given that the COO is clearly an important sort of dude.
Well, and our lead character, he is Seokwoo is a fund manager and clearly
Yes, yeah.
well, like at a high enough position that he's got people reporting to him and must be doing
Mm.
particularly well. So they're traveling on a nice high speed train. Um, we get this first attack. So the woman is kind of writhing on the ground, and one of the conductors sees her, and again they don't give away too much too early. So she's calling for
Yeah.
help. We then focus purely on the other conductor who's running through the carriage to this kind of call for help to get to them, and then the baseball team's carriage, they're all sitting there, and the conductor, she's walking forward with this zombie kind of on her back and kind of
Yes,
whimpering,
yes.
and then she falls to the ground and the zombie attacks someone else. And
It just
very
sort of pops off from there.
it really does, and it's like the descension into chaos is so fast, and there's lots of deliberate work done. So we see how the baseball team reacts, and some of them sort of step up and they get baseball bats out and they're going for it. Our lead baseball player is protecting his girlfriend, and
Pressure.
takes this leading role.
Yeah, yeah.
And everyone in the conductor starts running through the train. He's telling everyone to get moving, and we slowly see people starting to listen, but not everyone, because it's
Mm.
that thing, they're kind of not sure what's going on. But that horde of zombies very quickly kind of builds, and
It
soon
like a
it's
I remember thinking when I was watching it, it was like a wave. It just builds with this sort of ferocity and volume and intensity. And there's a couple of scenes later in the movie that sort of showcase this to another degree, which I'm sure we will talk about. But it really is sort of like they're just falling over themselves to move their way up the train. And it was really I found it pretty scary. I was like,
yeah,
that's an
like
effective way of like showing, because I feel like it's more than just sprinting zombies. It's like showing them almost like a force of nature.
well, and just sort of filling the space. So like you're
Yeah,
running, and
yeah.
the horde just expands to fill this
Mm.
space. We very quickly get Seok Woo with his daughter Suan. He was looking for her because she'd gone to the bathroom. She comes out and he turns around and sees her there as these zombies are coming towards him. He just picks her up and he starts running. And that, if this were real, that poor child then watches the zombies behind her as he runs away because he's got
Yes,
her over his shoulder.
when they got separated, I just knew. I was like, "Oh no, come on, find Suan!" Like, oh, it was a nightmare, and I'm not a father, but I was just like, "Oh, geez, I wouldn't want to be in
Yeah,
his shoes."
you feel it, and you sort of, we want them to be the kind of we want them to be the survivors, and so we're going, well, it has to work out, and of course it must work out. Like, that wouldn't make
Of
sense if she
course,
was taken that early in the film.
yeah.
Um, and so we're really kind of rooting for them to do well. As he's running, we see the other conductor get caught out, and he gets
Mm.
taken, and then he turns, and it sort of adds to that horde again. And our protagonist is just running through the carriage. He passes tough. What is it, Swole Daddy?
Swole Daddy,
Oh,
TM.
Swole
Oh,
Daddy
he's
and Swole Daddy's wife, and pushes past them. And we see like Swole Daddy kind of step up, and there's a zombie. He punches it in the face.
when he punched the zombie in the face, I was so sure he was going down. I just remember thinking, no, come on, like this is not the time for that. And
They almost do.
thankfully,
Like it's
yeah,
they really like they love like a bit of a a last minute kind of are they going to make it kind of moment in this
yeah,
film, and like we get a lot
yeah,
of them. And the big one we get here is this. There's this carriage, and they're trying to lock the door, and Swole Daddy and his wife are like on their way, and our protagonist is closing the door and finally relents and says, "Oh no, I better let them in." He lets them in, and we get this great confrontation where he's like,
yeah,
"Apologize to me for not like for closing the door before we got there," and they
yeah.
have like a real sort of confrontation until his wife kind of shuts it down.
Yeah, yeah. I remember thinking it. It's so funny because again, like we always see our idealized selves in movies, in medium like this, evidenced by the fact that watching it, I was like, oh, I would totally have, where's your compassion? Leave the door open, let them in. Whereas, that's definitely an idealized version of myself. But it is interesting the way that they sort of almost had a miniature hero's journey and in how that sort of works its way through the film, and it sort of comes. We'll talk about the later scenes that clearly this. That's the thing is I really do love the pacing and sort of I almost call them like checkpoints that this film sets up in these little human confrontations in between these life or death stretches.
Yeah, well, and it's also with one of the things that this film does quite well is there's this overarching goal to get to Busan,
Mm,
but there are little quests within it
yeah,
that
yeah.
that keep us kind of like keep us engaged along the way. Where we're not, there's never a point where you're like, oh, now we're gonna sit with like dealing with the human condition for the next 45 minutes while they have like a structured debate about whether or not they let this person live because they drank the water that was for the other people.
Yeah,
That happens
yeah.
so often in zombie films that they get to they go, well, this is our chance to kind of show how society is fragile, and you're like, I just want to see zombies.
Yeah, yeah. It's like we know society's fragile. We know people are dicks. We get it. Let's get some chomping going on.
Yeah, and they do quite well. Like you do get those society's fragile moments, but they're always in the context of
Mm,
something like urgent and big. And probably something we should talk about is that they're kind of creating the rules of these zombies, and one of them is that if they can't see you, they kind of
yes,
they
yes.
stop reacting and stop chasing you. And we see that when
The pregnant mum.
Seoku says they reacted when they saw us, and so she splashes water over the door and then sticks newspaper to the wet door
See, I went. Yeah, yeah. When that happened, I remember thinking that is so bloody ingenious. I never would have thought of that in a million years. And she literally just grabs a bottle of water and she's just, and within seconds, she's created this sort of calmer space.
the
It's
zombies are still
remarkable.
there, but then they've like lost awareness, and so they've stopped pressing against the glass. It reduces the
Yeah,
risk.
and you can't sort of hear these like strange inhuman growls that are coming from the other carriage as much as well.
um and it's an important rule that we need to learn for later in the film as well.
Yes, yes, yes. And I love this is the thing that I think frustrates me with some of the horror films that I watch sometimes. And I can't really think of any great examples right now, but it's like if you set up rules for a world, that's fine, but then stick to them. Don't Deus Ex Machina them later on and say, oh no, well it's okay because the power of love, or oh we magicked it. It's like this is the rules. This is what we've got to work in because when you're able to figure out when the protagonists or antagonists are able to figure out solutions or can circumvent those rules, it makes it so much more thrilling.
Yeah. But look, it's been a common thread of this podcast is that it's, you know, there are schools of thought that there are rules in horror that exist across the whole genre, and there are schools of thought that horror movies set their rules and kind of, as long as they clearly set and then abide by rules, then they are, you know, in good stead. I'm in that camp. I think that we need to allow horror movies to set and abide by their own rules. And we do talk about this kind of thing of like having overarching rules, you know, that vampires can never walk into a house uninvited or whatever they are.
Yeah.
But, you know, why do those rules exist? And maybe there's room to kind of to break them. You know, the big one is always that the promiscuous woman is murdered.
Of course, yeah, right.
Obviously not a trait for the zombie genre as much as it is for the slasher genre, but
no, yeah.
But you know, it's looking at how those rules kind of maybe need to be reinvented, broken, changed. You know, new. It's more interesting for films to come in and say we're going to create our own set of rules for this film, rather than kind of relying on. Sorry, we've gotten way off track.
No, but yeah, but it's important because, you know, again, it comes back in a very concrete way in Train to Busan because, and I think it's something that a lot of other zombie films all too often can do. You know, that they played with a little bit in #Alive, where they actually circumvented, and I'll say that there are no major spoilers. I'm not sure whether this would count as a minor spoiler, but if you don't want it, skip ahead. But I would say, you know, there is this expectation that the zombies are, you know, going to behave a certain way, and then in one scene, it's shown a zombie is shown climbing. For example.
This really bothered me because, you know, why were the zombies so kind of like? I always don't love that idea of a smart zombie.
No, yeah, because at that point, it's not really a zombie anymore. It's more of a generic monster, I guess. I mean, I suppose the ability to bite and infect in that way and the need for flesh and brains. But anyway, but I really love the way that they were able to create these rules around zombies and how they worked. And another great thing, really quickly, that I would just love to recommend is another Korean zombie piece of media that's on Netflix and available to stream at the moment is called, I think I might have mentioned it, Kingdom. Not sure if you've heard of it.
I have heard of, but have not seen Kingdom, so I better add it to the list.
So after I watched #Alive and Train to Busan, I also watched Kingdom. It's got a very famous Korean actress in it, Doona Bae, who's seen in a lot of Wachowski siblings projects. And it's fascinating in that way as well, because they introduce these rules around zombies. They're like, okay, well, they're going to behave this way in this circumstances and that way in those circumstances. Again, without wanting to give any spoilers away, definitely if you're into Train to Busan, I would give it a watch because it's similar in that way, and it just reminds me very heavily of it.
No,
but I'm very off track. Sorry.
No, not at all. This has been really great. I guess this is the point where everyone's kind of in that. They've all isolated themselves in this carriage or at this particular end of the train.
Yeah,
and it's where we see this chief operating officer become a bit of an antagonist. So he pushes the call button. He speaks to the driver, and the driver tells him that they've been ordered just to go through, not stop at the next station, but just keep going to Busan. And he gets very upset and is immediately saying, you know, I'm the chief operating officer of this company. You're going to stop at this next train station. And very quickly we start to pull into that train station and people are running and screaming and banging on the windows before zombies just start taking them out. Yeah. And the train speeds up and it just keeps going.
And I remember thinking, don't stop. I'm just waiting for those automatic door opening tone. But I can, unfortunately, and I did. But it was such an effective way of then, because then jumping ahead just a little bit, the way that they then handled the next stop and the way that, because I remember thinking as well how well protected the driver was, because he's in his little sort of locked cocoon, and I just remember thinking, if anyone's going to survive this, it's got to be the driver, surely.
Well, yeah, he's the most isolated and kind of in many ways safe, but also trapped. Like,
True, yeah, very true. I mean, you talk about socially distanced. He's, really sort of just locked away in that pod there, but where's he going to go? So and that's the thing is he had to, because he didn't know what was going on even more than the passengers when the CEO sort of pressed the button and was like, hey, he was sort of like, what's going on? What are you talking about? But then very quickly, as he pulled into that station, he saw that something was terribly, terribly wrong. And I just remember thinking, wow, like if it was me, I'd just foot down, let's go, buddy.
Look, there's a bit of an arc here for our protagonist, for Seok Woo, who he it's a thing like his daughter gives up a seat for one of the elderly sisters, and he talks to her, you don't need to be like that right now. You need to look out for yourself. And she again is like, no, that's not how we don't do that. We look after other people. We care for other people. And he is looking for an opportunity to get away from everyone. He calls a friend who's in the military, and there's an army sort of outpost at the next stop. And so they I think it's Daejeon that they're going to.
I think so. I'm trying to remember. I think it was Daejeon, yeah.
And they pull into there and they get out of the train and start heading through the station, heading towards the town square where they're sort of.
And I remember. No. I was going to say and this is the thing is, I remember when the train stopped. It's in such stark contrast to the last stop. It was an absolute ghost town, and he'd been talking on the phone to this military bloke that he knew, and he was sort of saying, "Oh, look, look, let's see what we can do. I'll see if my men at the stop can sort you out," because they were talking about the passengers needing to go into quarantine.
Well, which he goes he's told go to the East Square, not to the center.
Yes.
And he's trying to take his daughter away, and she's again sort of saying, why are we going a different way to other people?
Yeah. And the homeless man is following them, and I remember he's sort of saying to the homeless man, "Oh, look, you don't need to. What are you doing following us? Your entrance is over there." And the daughter is sort of looking at her dad, sort of thinking, you can sort of see it on her face a little bit. She's like, why are you doing this? Where's the harm? Let him come with us. And it's so funny because it's also, like I said, it's such a deserted train station that something's, that something's, I mean, they're off the train. Something's going to go wrong.
Yeah.
And as you
just look at it and think, what are you doing? Like, clearly something's wrong. Get back on the train.
That is literally what I thought. I remember when I was like, what are you doing? There's nobody here. Like, you would have expected some kind of military presence or something.
Well, I mean, they find the military presence as they're going down the lifts, and there's two things happening. The homeless man sees a guy in the distance, and he's kind of going towards him to get his attention. And at the same time,
this is through the east,
the east exit, and then we're also following the main group of people who are going down the escalators. And as they're going down, they slowly like see the kind of the main square open up, and it's packed full of zombies. And the second the zombies see them, because of this rule of like when they only react when they see us, they start heading towards them.
And I remember being so terrified because at the front of the people who were going towards those zombies is none other than Swole Dad and Pregnant Wife. I'm just thinking,
like, oh God, they're going to kill them.
Yes, I'm just thinking, how are they going to get out of this? But it was also really interesting because I think the protagonist calls the military guy again. If I remember this bit correctly.
I think the military guy calls him.
Well, he's
like, I've lost contact with my men.
And the second that he says that, because at the start, all you see is from behind as you're in the viewpoint of the people going down the escalators, is you see the backs of people's military uniforms. So we, the audience, know what's about to happen. That they've just winked at it clearly enough so that when he says that, you know that this is not a safe stop at all, and it is just an absolute scramble up the escalator. What an absolute nightmare. Up the escalator to try and get back to the train.
Yeah, well, so they're up the escalator, and Seok he turns around to see the zombies running in, and his daughter's still back at the main entrance, and there's a zombie coming right towards her.
Yeah.
Like, beautifully shot, this scene. The kind of
Yeah.
capturing him watching it and running towards her face as she turns around, and it's just like that little girl is an actor. Like, she's
Oh,
so
yeah.
good.
Incredible.
And as the zombie sort of launches in, it's like a comic book. That kind of Swoldad just launches in and elbows that zombie out of the way. It's
Yes.
so
Yes.
like just every part of it is so well timed and so well put together, and it's almost like you're
Yeah.
looking at frames out of like a graphic novel.
It's brilliant and only solidifies my love for Swole
Oh,
Dads.
he's
I
so
just,
good.
he's so brilliant. And I just, as soon as he did that, and it's so funny too, because, we were talking before about how, there are these little mini arcs and everything. And so they're trying to get back to the train. And they come to these big glass double doors. And I think, correct me if I'm wrong, a handful of the baseball team and Swole Dad go to close these glass doors so that everyone running to the train is going to have time. But Seok Woo and his daughter are on the other side of them. And so Swole Dad sees him and he looks and he has that thought cross his mind of, oh, well, you fucked me over. Maybe I should fuck you over. And you see him think, no, well, hang on, that's not how we do.
Mm.
And you see him let Seok Woo through. And it's this little moment, but I mean, it's obviously big enough where the director's making a point about this, and it's nice. I really enjoyed that, and I was sort of, it was almost like a turn the other cheek thing. And then you see the crush. Swoldad's really living up to his name, holding the glass door shut, trying to get the latch at the top of it. It was a brilliant tension building moment, I thought.
It really was. And we get down to the train, and it's one of those things. This is what, in my head, what really would have happened. These people are running, they run to the train, they open the door, and it's one of the zombie carriages.
Yes,
And the zombies
yes.
spill out. It's like, wait, why would you? But like, of
why
course,
wouldn't you check? But then, of course, easy
everyone's
enough
panicking
again.
and
Yeah.
but what we get here is we're really like giving all of the characters new motivation for the next stage of this. So they're all getting separated. The baseball player and his girlfriend get separated. The two sisters get separated. Seokwoo and Suan get separated, and with Suan and with the homeless man is Swoldad's wife.
Yes.
And so Swoldad, baseball dude, and Seokwoo all end up in one carriage at one end.
Yeah.
And we've got homeless guy. Hold on, we've got homeless guy, the
Pregnant
older
wife?
sister, pregnant wife, and Suan all
Suan.
in a toilet cubicle in a
And
zombie-infested carriage.
Is it also baseball guy's girlfriend?
No, she is in the safe carriage down the end with the chief operating officer.
Oh no, yes, that's right. That's
younger
right. Yes.
sister of the two old ladies.
Yep.
And like the bulk of the passengers, all the passengers who aren't important enough for us to know because we haven't developed feelings for them like we have with our main group.
Yeah. Specifically Swoldad.
Specifically Swoldad. But also, like, in all of this, we have this great scene. So the zombies break through the door, the others run down, then they break through the glass and fall onto the train.
Yes.
And as the driver gets going, Seokwoo and the baseball player get on there, but Swoldad's still running, and he ends up picking up a police shield and just like ramming a bunch of zombies coming towards him so he can keep going.
And when I saw that, I remember thinking, oh no, this is it for Swoldad. But he just dump trucks through with this police shield. Yeah, and I just
plows them. It's amazing.
Oh, incredible. Such a great moment. But it's an interesting one as well. And I'd love to like use this as the chance to restate my praise for the setting of rules with zombies. Because I think what can happen in a lot of films, not all, but when you've got a mindless enemy on one side of a partition and you on another, it's that partition, however thin, glass, whatever, is sometimes seen by the movie's universe as being impenetrable. But in this, the physics of having hundreds and hundreds, or what I can assume is dozens or hundreds of zombies pressed against glass, it just shatters and just out they come. And I really, it's a small thing, but I really dug it because I was sort of like, oh dang, I didn't expect that. Even though, of course, that's what would happen if you put all that pressure against glass. They're only train windows; they're just going to come spilling out. I mean, the door windows, the door glass.
It's so like, well, what we get is that we get the three of them sort of at the very back of the train. And they're in a safe carriage.
Yeah.
I think there's like they could see zombies, but they were able to close a door and essentially be separated from them.
Yeah. I think they used a fire extinguisher to fog up the glass.
That's up the front end.
Oh no, sorry. Yes.
It feels very much like Snowpiercer now, doesn't it?
It does. Another famous, I think, Canadian-Korean film. But anyway.
Yes, the original is like Canadian-Korean, isn't it?
I believe so, yeah. Not the TV show, the film. I think Bong Joon-ho did that one as well, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah.
But we what we get is there's everyone's separated, but they manage to get a call to find out that that Suan is with Swole Daddy's wife and with the others.
Yeah.
And they're sort of holed up in a toilet cubicle with zombies kind of banging at it because they haven't quite closed the door yet. And they're in like 13.
Yes, so
carriage
they're
13.
13.
And the trio of dudes is in carriage 9.
Yeah.
And then carriage 15 is where the bulk of the passengers, the safe carriage, is up the front.
Oh,
is that right?
You're probably right, because I remember thinking that they you know what? It's one of those things where I think I must have been so wrapped up in the action of what was happening on screen.
It was only like the third time I watched it that I actually started absorbing details because so much is happening all the time.
Because I thought that they took them back the way they came, because I thought that the trio were in between the bulk of the passengers on one end, and then
maybe they were. I thought they were heading. No, I reckon they're all heading in the same direction. Because
in the same direction?
Baseball dude heard from his girlfriend, and she told him where she was, and they were like, "Well, if we go that direction, we'll get them, and then we'll get everyone to where
right." Okay, yeah, you must be. Yeah,
they might not have gone in the same direction if they, he might not have helped them.
If she was, right.
But it becomes our new quest is to like get through the train.
Yes.
And we learn, well, those rules kind of play out here. So the first kind of push through the first carriage they have to get through, they kind of get through it relatively easily. Swole Daddy kind of leading the way as he does.
Oh yeah, so what they do is, and it's Baseball Guy's idea, and I remember thinking at the time, clever. He takes, I think, gaffer tape or duct tape or something.
Oh yeah, because he was in his carriage and he had his pad tape and stuff.
And so he tapes up his arms to make them unbiteable. And I remember thinking, in a zombie apocalypse, probably one of the best things you could wear is a Texas tux. Just go head to toe in denim and just see if anyone can bite through that.
I always thought that was a Canadian tuxedo.
Is it? I always thought it was a Texas. Gosh, I hope I'm not getting it mixed up with something else. But yeah, who knows? Texas, I'm sure, doesn't have the monopoly on it. But yeah, they did this thing. Now, I remember being a little bit annoyed because they taped just their arms and left so much untaped. And I'm sure that there was probably a reason for that. Like they ran out of tape or something. Because again, Swole Daddy takes, oh my gosh, how could I have forgotten this? Swole Daddy, up until this point, has been wearing the most beautiful outfits. Yes. I totally blanked on this, but I don't know if you thought so as well. But he's got like this beautiful, I think it's it looks like a crushed velvet jacket or something like that, and a scarf / cravat. Well, it comes off. The jacket comes off. The cravat scarf comes off.
He's just wearing a t-shirt.
He's got this little skin tight t-shirt wrapped around his bulky muscular frame and these taped up arms. And I just remember thinking, oh, watch out, zombies. But no, it's so good the way that they all sort of tape up. I thought it was very Sigourney Weaver and Alien almost. It was just like, it was really, really good.
Well, they get through that first carriage pretty easily, but the second one is baseball dude's teammates, and so
Yeah.
suddenly he's kind of has a bit of a crisis of these are these people that I know and they're my friends, and the other two kind of get slightly overwhelmed. Everyone's kind of fighting for their lives, and the train goes into a tunnel, and everything
Yeah.
goes dark. And as soon as it does, the zombies just kind of lose focus, and
Mm.
they're able to kind of get past them and get out.
Yeah, and it's interesting. They play with this a little bit because it turns out so the zombies not if they move silently, they're okay. But if they make noise, the zombies will swarm on the
Mm.
noise. And I can't remember there was an example of something they used to test that, but it worked out well for them.
Oh yeah,
And I
he
thought it was
hits he hits the bat on a bit of the
oh
like the
that's right
baggage thing,
yes
and they kind
yeah
of run to that.
yeah
Well, once they're through that carriage and they've got like the next horde to get past, they kind of hide in behind the seats, and he pushes his phone. He throws Swoldady's phone down the end,
yes
and rings it, and the zombies all kind of swarm on the phone. He
Mm.
makes fun of me for his ringtone, but I didn't know what the ringtone was.
Yeah, I think it was a Korean reference that probably flew over our heads,
Yeah.
but I'm sure it was I'm sure it was a good one. But yeah, I remember when I did that, I was a little indignant on Swole Daddy's behalf, but immediately thought, well, hang on a second, he probably doesn't need a phone as much as he needs to live, so it's
Yeah.
probably fine.
Well, and they use that to sort of get through, and then they get to that next carriage where
Mm,
they find the group of kind of their survivors. So they have Suan, Swoldady's wife, the homeless dude, and the younger of the two old ladies,
yeah.
and they continue on. There's another tunnel. Oh no, they all get locked in the toilets again because the train comes into the light,
Oh yes, that's
and so
right.
then they have to
Yes,
wait for the next tunnel. And when that
yes.
comes along, they're crawling along the baggage racks.
Yeah, because they're wondering how we're gonna get through with all of us in amongst the seats. And I remember thinking when they were making their way up, I was like, oh man, it's such an excellent way, again, such an enclosed space, such a great like building of tension. Because you just where are you gonna go if you get cornered?
Oh yeah, there's
Um,
nowhere
I was waiting while they were crawling along the top of those baggage things for one of them to collapse under someone's weight.
under
And I'm
Swoldady's
so
weight.
yeah. Well, I mean, I was going to say he's got probably the most mass, but I mean, it didn't happen. But I just remember thinking, oh no, 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 this is it. This
But
is
they
Swoldated
do.
curtain.
Seokwu and the homeless guy get trapped behind seats
Yes, yes,
and
that's
they're waiting
right.
for a tunnel, and he knocks a like a drink can, and suddenly the horde's on him, and they have to move quickly and get and close the door to the next section,
Yeah,
and the zombies end up breaking through, so they're running for the safe carriage where they put the fire extinguisher over the glass, and the chief operating officer, of course, is has decided that they're not coming in,
yeah,
and we have a pretty intense, like, well, it's the saddest scene for me.
yeah,
And I
yeah.
know that there's something coming up that's probably sadder, but for me, this was the saddest one.
I
That
know. Yeah, I'd probably agree.
Saul Daddy is holding back the door,
Yeah,
and
and so you see him absolutely just like he is struggling to it's a sliding door and he's just struggling to keep it closed and there are just these zombie arms just flying out of the door. It's absolutely nightmare stuff.
and the other at the other end, they're not letting the people in to
Yeah,
to the safe part where they would be able to close the door, and there'd be that
yeah, the
barrier in
barrier.
terms of the zombies wouldn't be able to see them. And so a few things happen. So Swole Daddy gets bit.
Yeah, so he's again, I maintain he didn't tape his hand.
He didn't tape his
um
hands.
and because he's holding the door, one hand quite close to where the zombies are reaching, somebody's able to just get him on the hand. And I
And
just, oh,
his poor wife is devastated. And like Seok Woo has to drag her in the other direction,
Yeah. Yeah.
and they end up he like they have this really great scene, and part of me is like, oh, maybe it breaks the rules a bit, but he fights the kind of the turning. He's like his eyes are going
Yeah.
glazing over and becoming milky white, and he's kind of shaking his head and continuing to hold them back out of his love for his wife and his unborn child.
Yeah.
And it's this really emotional scene, and you see like his poor wife being dragged in the other direction because she doesn't want to go,
Yeah.
and it's really tough. Like they built these characters up enough that you wanted them to survive. Often in zombie apocalypse movies, you kind of get to this point, you're like, yeah, who cares? I
Yeah.
really cared that he was
No,
dying because
yeah.
he was such
Absolutely.
a great character, but he was also, he had these great redeeming features about him that made him someone you really wanted to survive.
Yeah. I remember I watched it thinking, oh, look, if this happens, if that happens. And I remember thinking, oh, just let Swole Daddy and his wife adopt Suan and then we'll be fine, because I mean, clearly, which is obviously ridiculous, but you're absolutely right. Like it hit me like a ton of bricks. I was genuinely emotional at that scene.
Yeah,
and it
you
was
sent me a message. And you were like, "Swole Daddy, no."
well, it's because part of the things, because again, I'd heard all these things about Train to Busan, and one of the things I'd heard was the effectiveness it had in making you love these characters and then crush you at certain points throughout the film. And when it happened to Swole Daddy, I thought I was prepared, and I was not. And I just thought, oh no. But yeah, it was just heartbreaking. I mean, both him and the woman who plays his pregnant wife, fantastic actors.
Yeah.
I really believed, as she was getting dragged away, I thought that was just heartbreaking stuff.
It was incredible. What the other thing that happens, so the zombies break through, our little intrepid group of heroes manages to get through the door, but not before the older of the two sisters is bitten by a zombie. And
Yes.
while this is all happening,
is it the older one or
it's the older one. The younger one's
older one.
already in the kind of safe carriage, and she sees her sister, and she starts sort of, while everyone's closing the door, she's like, "What? No! Like, I can see my sister."
Yeah.
And she sees her get bitten and kind of loses hope. So once the group is
something in her.
Oh, sorry, you go.
Oh, sorry. I was going to say the way that I would, because again, fantastic performances all throughout this film. The way you sort of look at her and you just kind of see something in her break, and it's like everyone has been holding it together barely this entire trip, but something in her breaks, and you just think, oh, this isn't good. This is not good.
It doesn't end up being good. But once we're in this, the chief operating officer, who really is the real antagonist of this piece, he immediately is wanting to kind of get rid of these people who've come in, and he is immediately saying, oh, he's bit, he's not safe, and the kind of,
well, that's how he actually, because I keep forgetting his name, but the dad, Seok Woo. Seok Woo, I can't remember if he punches him or he threatens to punch him. And
I think he does punch him.
He's saying, "Why didn't you let us in?" And the COO is, in response, turns and yells to everyone, "He's bit." And from there on, it's just, you were just saying, sorry, but yeah, I think the crowd just...
Yeah, they all just turn on him and they're like, oh, you have to get out. And they send them through the carriage to like what is essentially the space between the locomotive and the first carriage.
Yeah.
And close the door and lock it behind them. Baseball guy's girlfriend goes with them. He says, you'll be safer here. And she's like, I just want to go with you.
Yeah.
But the younger of the sisters, who's just seen her older sister get bitten, doesn't go.
No.
And she looks at her sister, now a zombie, on the other side of that glass. And while everyone else is kind of tied, like they've got all their neckties tied and they're trying to like secure the door.
So against the non-infected.
Yeah, against the non-infected people. And she just walks up, she puts her hand up on the glass, the zombie's hand is up on the glass as well, and then she just opens the door.
It's chilling and poignant and haunting all in one. It's a Fucking brilliant scene.
Oh, it's so good. It's like she just kind of goes, you know, we could have saved her and our selfishness didn't. Like, yeah, she doesn't say that, but it's kind of
No, yeah,
the sense that you get from this, and she just goes, "Fuck everyone."
yeah.
I'm
I
opening
mean,
this
it's kind
door.
of yeah. And you know what? Like, I remember thinking at the time, as ridiculous as this sounds, I remember thinking at the time, you go, girl.
Yeah, no, I did too. I was
I
like,
just, I,
yes.
because it's like, what's the point of remaining human if you don't retain any humanity?
Yeah.
You've got to try and look after the weakest. And it's again, really projecting an idealized self. But certainly, like when she did that, and COO guy sees it just before it's about to happen, he starts yelling. He goes, "Hey, wait a minute, wait a minute!" And I just remember thinking, "You son of a bitch." Yeah, it's just brilliant.
Well, in my head, I was like, and that's the end of the film. Like,
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it could have ended there. And I say it could have. I mean, in terms of plausibility, because like you've got all them up front with the locomotive. I mean, there's not really anywhere else um, to go in terms of to use the Snowpiercer analogy. They're at the front of the train. There's the train's going nonstop to Busan, and the driver this whole time is trying to radio ahead, saying, "Hey, like, what's going on? Can you tell me if it's clear to come into Busan?" And it's very. He's not getting a very clear reply.
no,
And so you're sort of
and what's interesting is that we kind of what I initially was like, well, this is the third act, this is the end of the film, is actually it's more the low point that we're hitting, and
yeah.
and they come to this point where they're several trains have crashed, and that their train has to stop. They're at what is essentially a change depot or another station.
I think so. Yeah, there's like a derailed train lying across the tracks that they
Yeah.
physically just can't get past.
And so they have to stop the train and get out. And that driver, like, he has this great, like, there's obviously a survival instinct there, but he also has this
Yeah,
great sense of duty that he wants everyone to get on a different train.
yeah.
And when he can't get on the train that they were hoping to take, he goes and he finds another train that is an older version, like an older engine that he's not used to using.
Kind of like a V line if you're from Victoria,
Yes,
or I
like
suppose
one of
if you're
our
not like a
shitty trains.
yeah, yeah, like a diesel
Yeah, it's like a
powered
freight
sort of
train. It's not a
yeah,
high powered,
yeah,
sleek, fast train. It's a slower
yeah.
freight train that you use for transporting, I don't know, cars and shit.
Goods, I suppose. Yeah, yeah, whatever. But it's interesting because he goes into the station, he's trying to find one, and there's another zombified driver in there. They get us good with a jump scare at
Yeah.
that bit. The only jump scare I will give to this movie. But
They
no,
yeah,
yeah,
they don't rely on the jump scares much, do they?
no. Which I mean, again, I as a horror fan, I've never been a big fan of jump scares. I think it can be done well, but I think a lot of horror movies just rely on a sudden fright. Whereas again, this Train to Busan film, there's a real, there's just this slow build menace. Even when it's high sort of stakes intensity, it's always like, what's coming next? What could possibly happen next?
Well, a lot happens next.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
there's a train that's on fire that crashes into other trains. Baseball dude and his girlfriend get on a carriage, but then she gets bitten. And
Oh yeah. So what happens is because you recall how she gets bitten.
I don't. I
Okay,
just wrote down she got bitten.
So the car that has been overrun by zombies after the younger sister opens the door, it turns out that, yes, it turns out that the COO guy and one of the train attendants has bloody survived. He's locked the two of them in a bathroom. And so when the train stops, when the driver stops the train, and again, this just makes you hate him so much more. He opens the door, he sees that he's trained, and he tells the attendant, "Oh, it's safe to go out now." So obviously, he opens the attendant opens the door a crack, and the COO guy pushes him out the door, essentially sacrificing him to get eaten by zombies, while he just basically beats it out of the train, and a bunch of zombies are chasing him. And so he's essentially just leading zombies on a chase And at one point, he leaps into the carriage the carriage that baseball guy and his girlfriend are in, and literally grabs the girlfriend and throws her back into the chasing zombies where she gets bit. And then I think baseball guy is able to push the zombie off and close the door. And this was another scene that I found to just be really poignant and haunting. Is you see her slowly succumbing to the zombification process, which you haven't seen a whole lot of in the movie prior. And he's just holding her in his arms and he's just weeping, and she turns and he's just crying as he just lets her bite him.
Yeah.
It's actually quite haunting stuff. And the CEO guy has run out the other door. He keeps running. But it's haunting stuff.
Well, with the so we have that kind of that crash happen, and Soo-Ann, Seok-woo, and the pregnant lady and the homeless dude are all trapped under a train that's it's tipped over, but it's caught on another train, and there are zombies in there trying to break through to get to them.
Yes, and it comes back to that earlier thing where we've seen that if there's enough pressure of zombies on a glass surface, it will break. And so it's just this ticking time bomb waiting for them to fall through. And it's brilliant. I'm trying to think what happens next.
Well, so Seok-woo gets out, but everyone else is kind of stuck. He has to something falls down and he's moving it. And as the zombies start falling through the glass because of that pressure, the homeless guy is helping. He's holding them back.
And he looks at them and sacrifices himself. He does that thing where I think he grabs a piece of rebar or something and is like blocking them.
Yeah, he's blocking them. And Seok-woo manages to get whatever is obstructing the exit out of the way. The other two get out, and just as it happens, the train collapses down.
Yeah.
And crushing everyone, except the zombies just keep climbing out of it because they're all inside it. And so the glass is broken, the doors are open, they're climbing out of the train and chasing after them. And they run for this old diesel engine that has started moving.
And this is where I think it was either just about this time or just before we see the final act of sheer dickery from the COO, where he's running and zombies are chasing him. And the driver, again, I think you summed it up perfectly before when you sort of talked about, a combination of sense of duty and survival instinct. The driver sees this guy running and he's like, oh, well, it's a human being. I've got to help him. He jumps out of the safety of his little train compartment, runs to help the COO guy, arm outstretched. Again, the COO guy grabs him and throws him to the ground to just for no reason, but to act as bait while he runs to get to the engine. I just remember thinking, wow, that was so unnecessary.
Yeah, like it sort of beggars belief because your chance of surviving as you throw all these people to the zombies, you're A, creating more zombies.
Yes.
And B, like you're putting yourself in this situation where you don't have other people to help you survive. And it's like, oh, if I'm, only I can survive, well, you're not going to survive.
It's like, well, do you know how to drive a diesel engine? I guess you got to find out real quick.
Yeah. Well, it turned out that Seok-woo knew how to drive one.
Yeah, funnily enough.
He worked it out.
Yeah, he figured it out.
Well, so our three sort of protagonists that are left get onto this train, and when they get to the door, they see that COO is there, but he's turning. He hasn't quite turned yet, and he's not willing to admit it. But then
it's really haunting, actually, the way he's saying. I'm trying to remember exactly, but
actually, before that happens, so all the zombies grab onto the back of the train. How did we forget?
Yes, that's right.
If you do a gift search for Train to Busan, this is the scene this is the thing that you get.
I have to. I'm sorry, I do believe you, but right now I'm literally going to check that Train to Busan GIF. But yeah, it's wild the way that it's just high adrenaline stuff. I remember my heart was just beating. I was just watching this thinking, oh no, come on, guys. You can do it. Surely you
This
can do it. It
train
could be a
is
happy ending.
this train is driving away, and more zombies are grabbing on, and they're just creating this sheet of zombies all holding onto the train, being dragged behind, climbing over each other to get onto it.
It's exactly that. Yeah, it's a sheet of zombies, is what it
Yeah,
is.
and Seok is kicking at them, trying to get them off, and they're all attacking him.
Mm.
And he finally gets enough of them to let go that they kind of lose their grip and fall behind and start running, but the train's going too fast by that point.
Yeah,
And that's when they go to the compartment, and Chief Operating Officer Dude is there and
yeah,
turning into a zombie. And he's like a child. He's like
yeah.
having this tantrum, like how could he can't be bit. It's not fair. It's yeah, he's
He's saying, "Take me to my mum.
yes.
This is my address in Busan. I want to see my mum." Childish is exactly what it is, and it's kind of creepy.
And then he turns and
Yeah,
he he Seokwoo has to fight him off, and he realizes the only way he can do it is to like let him bite him so he can get him over the edge of the train and then push him
yeah,
off.
yeah,
So he sacrifices himself, and this is this arc where he was trying to just save himself and his daughter the whole time, and then at this point he just goes, well, the only way I can save my daughter is to be completely selfless and sacrifice myself. And so he gets bitten and uses that to chain himself and throw both him and the chief operating officer off. Because he's chained on, he like stays on the train, and the chief operating officer zombie falls, obviously just to get back up and keep running.
yeah. Sue-Ann the whole time is just bawling her eyes out, and it honestly, it's a cry that just like is like a dagger in your heart.
Yeah.
It's like it's convincingly traumatic.
Yeah.
It's I don't know if you've seen it's from a few years ago now. It was the movie adaptation of Stephen King's The Mist.
Yes. Yes, I have seen.
Big spoiler, but at the end there's a scene where the protagonist lets out a cry that's just haunting. And this was on that same level for me, Sue-Ann just letting out this gut-wrenching cry.
It's like, it's incredible. I think what's incredible is this kind of, it's this really great story of how he was put, like he was this very kind of focused, almost selfish person.
Yeah.
And this experience for really the character development is all just to see him change into someone like Swoldad, essentially, to like to become that selfless, I need to sacrifice myself for the people I love kind of person.
Yeah.
And he quickly sets them up in the sort of front of the train and tells them how to slow down. Like when it's time to stop, use that. And okay. He hugs his daughter and he closes the door, and then he stands at the back of this train and we see his shadow as he lets himself fall.
And he's like picturing all the beautiful moments of his daughter. It's so hard. It's pretty heartbreaking. I probably rate it roughly on the same level as the loss of Swole Daddy, I would say.
For some reason, Swole Daddy was just felt more to me.
I know what you mean. I think I felt like I had to feel, it's because I think Swole Daddy had more of a personality.
Yeah.
Whereas the protagonist, Sukui, was probably a little bit too bland. I don't mean that in a negative way. I mean, I do, but I suppose it's one of those things where it's like, you can't have a protagonist be almost too personality driven. I mean, you can, but I don't know. Yeah, it's just one of those things, I guess.
Yeah. Well, we get to almost to Busan. Like they get to a tunnel just outside it, and they have to stop the train because there's all these barriers up there, and there are zombies that have kind of been caught in the traps, but are incapacitated, and they have to get out and walk. And so
and there was a jump scare in there which I did not appreciate. Train to Busan.
Oh yeah, I know exactly which one.
Screamed out loud. My partner was very shocked. She was not watching the movie at that point. But yeah, there's like a zombie stuck on barbed wire, and as they sort of walk past, it's like and it just it got me good. It got me
It's
good.
really good. But they something I feel like I'd never do. They just walk into this tunnel.
Yeah, because it's like it looks pitch black, and I just remember thinking you could have so many zombies.
Well, luckily. Cuts to the other side of the tunnel, and there are these soldiers who are kind of pointing guns at it and sort of monitoring. And they say that there are two people approaching, and they say, "Can you confirm that they're human?" And they can't. They're not sure. And so he says, "Well, you've got to kill them."
Yeah.
And as he's lining up the shot to shoot,
And I'm just thinking, please, just let me have this movie. Don't take this away from me.
I was waiting for them to be like, and then they both get shot. The end.
Yeah. I was thinking it would do that thing where it like fades to black and you just hear the but
Oh god. But no, and something we completely didn't talk about, but at the beginning of the film, Suan
yes.
was meant to sing in front of her class, and she has stage fright, and he watches the video of her getting stage fright and the kids laughing at her, and she is crying and singing the song that she couldn't sing in front of her classmates as she walks through the cave.
Because her dad wasn't there. She and because it was the thing where he wasn't around enough, and it's this thing where she's just soldiering on with this pregnant lady trying to sing.
And it saves them because the soldiers hear the singing and realize that she's human, and they send people to go and get them, and that gets us to the end of the film.
Yeah,
it's so good.
Oof. Even just reliving it right now, I'm just like, oh goodness grief! It's a tour de force. I always wanted to use that phrase.
I find it so interesting because I sort of talk to people. I'm like, oh, it's this amazing Korean zombie film, and they're like, oh, I don't watch subtitles. I'm like, you are missing out. Like, there are so many good films, but this one in particular is just like it incredible. Is, I think, as close to a perfect zombie film you can get.
I would agree with that because, and it comes back to a whole bunch of reasons, but one that just always sticks out to me is just that enclosed space in the train makes me feel so claustrophobic, especially with this wave of zombies ever present in the next carriage.
Kind of billowing out.
That's what I thought that they would do like a sequel set on a ship or in a plane or something.
Well, so I don't know much about the sequel. I don't think it's available in Australia yet.
It received. I haven't seen it, so I'll preface this with that. It was supposed to come out. Obviously, COVID I think impacted the release relatively significantly. It hasn't received glowing reviews.
It's hard to follow something like Train to Busan.
Yeah.
But also, from what I understand, it's a standalone sequel. So it's not like following these characters to the next stage. I would assume a standalone sequel means it's seeing that same zombie apocalypse launch, like take hold somewhere else, or
it's set at a later date. And it's more military focused, which I think can be so hit and miss. And I haven't seen it, so I can't really say, but sort of having read the synopsis on IMDb, I remember feeling pretty lukewarm about it.
It's so like, I mean, like it's not that I'm disappointed, but I'm a little bit disappointed.
No, I know, because it would be so. It comes back to rule building and world building for me. Again, as a horror fan, one of the biggest things I love is like building fascinating worlds and rules within those worlds. And it brings me to one of the best pieces of zombie media I've ever consumed. Not the film with Brad Pitt, the original book, World War Z, which is an anthology of stories and interviews. Such a good way of showing, well, hang on, how, like, if a zombie apocalypse happened, what would happen? What would be the socio-political, and military fallout from something like that? And I feel like a sequel could have been something like that. And from the plot synopsis, it sounds like they try to do something kind of like that, but it doesn't grab you.
Well, it's so interesting because always think about World War Z as this kind of the film took the complete wrong message when they decided to adapt that book. They should have adapted the book in that way of like, because it was a journalist traveling and meeting all these people to interview them about how they survived, and all of them had these very interesting stories, all of them sort of connected to kind of legend in some way in terms of, you know, they were the legends of survival in this apocalypse, and he was telling their stories. And that they turned it into this film that's like Brad Pitt's an action hero, and you're just like, oh, you missed what was great about that book.
Yeah.
Like the book was so much, it was about ordinary people, and instead he's this fucking super soldier.
Ugh. It would have made a great like anthology TV show, I reckon. I reckon that would have been a great way to adapt it. But, and you know, look, it is what it is, you know, but Train to Busan, forget about the sequel. I mean, you know, so watch it if you want to, but I might give it a miss. I'll probably hate watch it, but we'll see how we go. But yeah, Train to Busan is fucking incredible.
It's so good. Well, we're almost ready to wrap up, but before we do, this one might be hard because this might not be, like, you know, the camp scary is a scale, but is there a campus line of this or moment of this film?
You know what? I thought you might ask this, and I actually definitely do have a campiest line and a campiest moment. I think the campiest moment for me is when Swole Daddy and his wife are talking to the daughter, and she says something about her dad being a fund manager, and he says something like, "Oh, right, so he's just a locust on the world," or something to that effect. And I just remember sort of snickering a little bit at that one. I mean,
well, not
wrong,
only that,
I suppose, but
his wife kind of scolds him, and the little girl goes, "Oh no, I know."
Yes, that's right. So I remember thinking that one was a good one. I mean, in terms of a campy moment, there's some found footage earlier in the film or a news report or something of some skateboarders and in a park as there's this apocalypse is taking over. And you see these helicopters that are just trailing sort of zombies
hanging off them,
and they fall, you know, dozens of feet and splatter into the pavement and just stand up and start chasing the skateboarders. I remember, and alternatively, any moment Swole Dad is wearing his crushed velvet jacket and his fancy scarf for that.
Yeah,
no,
that's
great.
Is there a scariest moment for you?
It was the saddest moment, that's for sure. The whole thing, honestly, had me on the edge of my seat, the way that it was building the tension. Scariest moment, probably when they were trying to make their way up on top of the baggage rails back through the train.
Yeah.
I remember that was genuinely just really good. Also, I'm trying to think if there's anything like real super scary, but it was just that general sense of unease I felt all the way through.
Yeah. No, it certainly is one of those ones like your heart just races throughout.
Yeah.
And finally, we have a camp scary scale. So this is a scale of classification, not of value. It goes from 1 to 7, from divine camp to pure terror. Where do you think this film lands on the camp scary scale?
Oh, look, it's got to be almost entirely pure terror.
Yeah, it's up that end for me too.
Yeah, like it's just not much. There's very little campiness about it. I feel it goes about its business in a very matter-of-factly way, I think.
Well, and also like often the function of camp is to break tension or reduce terror, and there's just so few moments that this film tries to break any kind of terror, break that sense of terror,
that tension.
They just lean into, you're going to be uncomfortable for this entire time.
Yeah, you really don't take a breath. Even after the credits are rolling, I remember I was like, oh geez, I'm gonna watch something lighthearted, put on some Parks and Rec or something after that.
It's a bit like that, isn't it?
Yeah.
So I feel like we could put that at a 7. It's a pure terror.
I think so, yeah.
This might be our first pure terror of the podcast.
That's exciting. Oh, what's going to be the next, I wonder?
Well, I want to say thank you, Daniel. It has been an absolute pleasure to talk about Train to Busan with you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for inviting me on.
Oh, it's been so much fun. Is there anything you want to plug?
There's not anything for myself. My friends, Vix and Lauren, have a great podcast called Wonderfully Done.
Yes, I've been listening to Wonderfully Done.
Yeah.
All about sex and communication and really dealing with those topics that maybe we want to talk about but don't always get to talk about because we don't know who to talk about it, we don't know how to talk about it, and they are all about looking at ways that we can have those conversations and having them with you. It's really
Definitely,
great.
yeah. So I would definitely recommend that. Give them a listen. They're an absolute delight to listen to. In terms of a media that I'd love to shout out, because I feel like not enough people are talking about it, Lovecraft Country. Lovecraft Country. It is one of the best horror TV shows I've ever seen. And it is a fascinating look at how you take Lovecraft, infamously unadaptable for any kind of visual medium, and also with his relatively well-known sort of history of racism, and it doesn't shy away from any of that. It delves into it really in a way that is really effective. Jordan Peele is one of the producers, and that man knows how to make a piece of horror.
Oh, he does. We haven't done Get Out or Us yet, but I really want to talk about them because they are. There's an earlier episode where we talk about The Cabin in the Woods, and we talk about kind of the need for to put a line under those rules of horror and let there be a more open, free idea about what horror is. And I think if anyone is really showing how you can break the mold and still create incredible horror, it is Jordan Peele. He really absolutely knows his stuff.
He's an auteur, I believe, is
yes, an auteur of horror. Well, thank you so much for joining me. For those of you at home, you can follow Camp Scary and Squee on Instagram and Twitter by going to @CampScaryPod. If you have questions or suggestions, you can email campscarysquee@gmail.com and make sure to rate and review Camp Scary and Squee so that other horror fans can find us. Thanks for joining us, and remember, don't scream. They'll hear you.